And now, to help us celebrate our accomplishments and investment in mission for One Earth, and to provoke our commitment even further, we are honored to welcome David Orr as our next speaker. David recently retired as a Paul Sears Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies and Politics and Senior Advisor to the President at Oberlin College. He is the author of 7 books, including Down to the Wire, Confronting Climate Collapse, published by Oxford Press in 2009. In addition, he has authored nearly 200 articles, reviews, books, chapters, and professional publications. For more than 25 years, he has been the leader in the sustainability movement, receiving dozens of awards and honorary degrees, including the Lyndhurst Prize, a National Achievement Award from the National Wildlife Federation, and the Visionary Leadership Award from Second Nature. More recently, he has headed the efforts to design, fund, and build the acclaimed Adam Joseph Lewis Center at Oberlin, which has been recognized by the National Panel of Architects as the most important green building of the past 30 years, and as the 30 milestone buildings of the 20th century by the U.S. Department of Energy. And on top of all of this achievement, Professor Orr also lays claim to a United Church of Christ membership at First Christian in Oberlin, United Church of Christ. Please welcome David Orr.
Sarah, thank you very much. I'm amazed by how you do your business. I've been sitting here watching, I keep thinking, what if the U.S. Congress operated like this? But then you couldn't get 40,000 lobbyists in this space. I'm proud to be part of the UCC Church from Oberlin, Ohio, and I'm proud of the denomination and all the work that you do and the connection that you're making between theology, church operations, and ecology and the natural world we live in. I'd like to talk a bit about climate change. It is the issue of our time. And we have it on high authority that we were given a choice between life and death. And we were asked to choose life. But there's no one in this room or any room around the planet looking at the trends without being overly pessimistic or overly dramatic. There's no one that could say that, in fact, we have chosen life. To the contrary, if you run the film of this time, fast forward, there are none of the numbers that support that particular idea or that choice. So I want to talk about climate change, and I want to talk about our obligation as a church and how do we extend that. The numbers are roughly these. How many of you know that curve? Let me just see a show of hands. Maybe 20%? You know, if I showed a picture of, let's say, the Coke banner or the McDonald's M or the Nike swoosh, everybody around the world knows those numbers or knows those curves. But in this case, most people don't know this. I once had those 4 curves on a screen, and I said to the audience, you know, one of those can kill you. And somebody yelled out from the audience, says, no, 3 of them can kill you. And the issue is, this is what's called the Keeling curve. And you'll notice the sawtooth, if I can go back to the slide here, the sawtooth configuration of it. The Keeling curve is a record of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And David Keeling went to Mauna Loa in the Hawaiian chain in 1958 to measure carbon dioxide, and it was 315 parts per million, as many of you know, in 1958. We just crossed 400 parts per million a month and a half ago. We've never been there before. Now, if you take this line, and this is the professor in me coming out, if you take this line and extend it to the left-hand side out about 640,000 years, it doesn't go above 280 parts per million. And if you weaken the standards of evidence a little bit, you can go out several million years further to the left-hand side here, and the same is true. It doesn't go above 280 or 290 parts per million. That's a complicated way to say we've never been here before. Not as a species. The planet has been, but that was millions of years ago. If you go to the right-hand side of this, there is no plan to stop this before it hits 450 or 500, and some people believe they're on a path for 1,000 parts per million. Now, the theory that we work with as a society is that, gee, you can raise the temperature of the planet, you can turn the thermostat up, and nothing else wobbles over on the other side. But that's not the way the world works. That's not the world you read about in the morning paper or see in the news, or that's not how this black swan world works, where small changes have very big effects. So this is one of the problems. The black arrow indicates that there is a 30-year lag between what comes out of our tailpipes and smokestacks and the climate change-driven weather effects that we experience. And the world, if you pay attention to this, you know that all around the world now for years and years, we're seeing hottest hots, wettest wets, driest dries, windiest wind conditions. In other words, we're seeing the planet not just get warmer, but it is destabilizing in all kinds of ways. You don't just raise a thermostat and nothing else happens on the other side. And so this 30-year lag poses a problem for us. We're good at solving problems, but we're also prone to procrastinate. And so the effects that we're seeing now have nothing to do with 400 parts per million. Do you follow me? This has everything to do with what we did in 1982 and 1983 when Ronald Reagan told us it was morning in America again. I'm not going to be political, but it's now twilight. So here's the difficulty. We hit 400 parts per million about 6 weeks ago. The rate of increase is rising, and so the effects are now locked in for 30 or so years. And I will tell you, as a teacher of young people for about 40 years, this is the hardest thing we have to message. Do you tell the public the truth and then be as positive and optimistic as you can possibly be? Now, I want to make a distinction with this. Optimism is a prediction that you're going to win. And as a longtime Cleveland Indians fan, I haven't been optimistic since Willie Mays caught that ball out in center field off Vic Wirt's bat. If you're old enough, you know what I'm talking about. If you're pessimistic, that's a sin. You don't want to go there. And so hope is that middle ground. And hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. If you're optimistic or if you're pessimistic, you don't have to do anything. If you're hopeful, however, you have to do something. It's a real honor to follow the preceding presentation. Those are UCC members and pastors and churches doing things and actually engaged in changing the world. So here's what the future looks like. Let me just run this ahead. And I want to explain this slide a little bit. These are two curves. One is CO2 in the atmosphere, and that one is the vertical line going straight up. The other is temperature, and we know from the science that these go kind of in tandem. One goes up, the other goes up. There can be a bit of a lag, but these are related, as is methane and some other things. It's not entirely clear about cause and effect, but these run in tandem. Now, the right wing, and I don't want to get into politics, but the right wing has made a big deal about that bottom circle here, that it appears that temperature has leveled off. Now, here's where we all need to be students of how the world works as a physical system. We're engaged in a massive effort now to try to understand how we provision ourselves with food, energy, water, materials, all those things that we do over here, human intention, and somehow match that up with the way the world works as a physical system. Do you follow me? That is the ultimate design issue. And then we have to understand how the world works to inform intention. There's that little feedback loop that comes back to what we think we can get out of the planet and how many generations that can be sustained. And the word sustainable means we do what we do now in ways that honor the requests and the needs and so forth of future generations as far as you can go. Now, this little plateau here, that bottom right-hand arrow, Here's what goes on. And the Earth is a complicated system. It isn't just complex, it's complicated. It's both of those things. And we're understanding this little by little. But in my lifetime, what's called Earth system science has grown dramatically. And now your job and my job is to begin to connect Earth system science with theology and church operations, or in my case also with education and whatever other professions you may have. So here's the other side of the science that has not made much of the press. So why did that little plateau occur? Well, the Earth warms unevenly. And we've got to understand enough Earth system science to counter the right wing that is confusing the issue. And so what you're looking at are the blue lines here. That is the ocean down to about 2,000 meters below the surface. The oceans have been the big thermal anchor. And so the Earth doesn't warm immediately. You don't emit carbon from your car or a smokestack, and all of a sudden the Earth warms at some predictable level. They are not that tightly coupled, but they are closely coupled. And so we're looking at the oceans warming, and once the oceans warm and when they acidify, and so the warming and acidification where they do not absorb carbon, then we'll see a large spike in temperature. And there are some signs that in fact is beginning to occur. Do you follow what I'm saying here? Now, I don't want to get into all the wonky science, but we have to, as church members and as followers of Christ, we have to, and people who profess to care for the creation, we have to understand how the creation works and how human actions affect the creation. So that's one issue. So this is a report taken, and the numbers here don't matter. It's the colors that matter on this. This is taken from an International Energy Agency report. This is not a radical group. They tend to be very understated. But this is the world we're looking at, where all the land in red in the lower portion of those maps, that is land now that will go through extreme warming, and that will begin to occur almost immediately. We're seeing land temperatures begin to rise, but that's a world that goes to 2 degrees or 4 degrees centigrade, perhaps even higher. Now, it wasn't long ago, if you follow the science, that we were told that 2 degrees centigrade warming was the ultimate that we could have. Beyond that, all bets are off. And yet we're already at around 0.9 degrees centigrade. We are locked into probably another, as your resolution said that you dealt with 2 days ago, said we're probably locked into another 0.4 to 1.2 degree warming. No one knows exactly, but we're already given that lag. We're already locked into a substantial warming. So this is the future that we're going to live in. Now, this is hard for us to take. Can all of you read that in the back? Can you all read this? The point of this slide, this comes from David Archer, and I don't like to use PowerPoint like this, but this is an important point. I want to make it. Once we've changed atmospheric chemistry, the change tends to be permanent. It's the way we measure time. So once we've emitted carbon to the atmosphere, and this gives us a sense of urgency that is quite extraordinary. Once we've changed atmospheric chemistry, carbon tends to stay in the atmosphere a long time. I'm about to get on a plane to fly back to Cleveland. A quarter of the carbon that I'll release or be released on my behalf by that aircraft will still be in the atmosphere something like 1,000 years from now. And so once we've changed atmospheric chemistry, this is a long-term change. Now, take a deep breath. How do we say this to our fellow parishioners and congregation members and our students and other people around? This is the toughest messaging problem I've ever seen and that I could ever imagine. Do you tell people the truth and then take the risk of paralyzing them, or do you soft pedal this and describe this as a, quote, solvable problem? Now, if you've got a broken carburetor on a Chevy or Ford pickup truck, that's a solvable problem. And Americans are good at solving problems. This is not solvable in the same sense. So what do we tell people? And the one thing I would say is remain hopeful, do everything that you can where you are in every way possible, but don't be locked in to despair. But there is a different world coming. Bill McKibben's last book calls it Earth, E-A-A-R-T-H. Somebody was saying 20 years ago that we've now gone from the Holocene, the only paradise humans have ever known, to the Anthropocene, an era when we're the drivers of the planet. But what David Archer is saying here, and the science is simply that once carbon is in the atmosphere, you change the atmospheric chemistry for a long time. This is no longer the atmosphere that we knew for the past 10 or 20,000 years or throughout the entire career of humans on Earth. And so climate change, when people talk about what climate change is, it isn't just global warming. This is planetary destabilization. When people say, well, gee, I don't believe in climate change. Now, if they say, look, I don't believe in Jesus or Moses or Buddha, that's climate. Or pardon me, that's belief. But if they say, I don't believe in climate change, that's just physics and chemistry. And no one tells you much, I doubt it, that, gee, I don't believe in the laws of gravity. And if they do, there are some pretty definitive tests. Come to the top of the building with me. Let's check it out. You jump first. So this isn't a matter of belief. This is simply a matter of science. And we're learning the science as we speak. Thirdly, this isn't an isolated problem. This is symptomatic, and call our carbon sins, but this is symptomatic of something much deeper. It isn't just a solvable problem in that sense. It's a matter of a lots more that the church deals with, and it is paradoxical in most ways that you could think of. Fourth, this isn't really controversial. If you poll scientists, 98, 99% will say, yes, this is right. And the theory is well known to be true. Put heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere, you trap heat. If you put a great deal of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere, you trap a lot of heat. The science is at that level fairly simple. It gets a lot more complicated below that. But this isn't really controversial. Now, think about how we deal with risk. If I told you that you can get in this car and you can drive over to the mall, but the odds of a fatal accident in that car while you're in it are 50-50, you wouldn't get in the car. But now we're being told that if we can keep carbon below 450 parts per million in the atmosphere, we have a 50-50 chance, maybe, of avoiding a 2-degree centigrade warming. But 2 degrees, remember, that's the threshold. That's the guardrail between us and possible catastrophe. So this is a real issue. And then finally, from David Archer's slide just a moment ago, this is a long-term problem, not a short-term problem. And it means we're going to have to discover the roots and the wherewithal to have stamina and to stay with this. This won't be solved by the election of another president or in 10 years or 20 years. There's no technology known that can solve the problem of carbon in the atmosphere. And that's a whole other issue we don't need to get into here. And so this is the story. The consensus on climate change is virtually unanimous. It's coming at us faster. It will last longer. It will cover the whole planet. And it is the toughest issue humans will ever face. And you think about the role that we live much better because we were able to exploit carbon-based fuels. And now we have to make a very fast transition from that. Now, I want to deviate a little bit. You can't read that slide, but what the slide shows down at the bottom here is the first warning we got about climate change and carbon in the atmosphere. And Svante Arrhenius, a Swedish scientist, began to do these very complicated calculations about carbon and its effect on temperature on the planet, and he got it pretty close to right. He was doing this by hand. We now do this in a matter of milliseconds with a computer, but Arrhenius' calculations were pretty much dead on the money. Then you come up that line, and on the right-hand side in yellow are the carbon levels, the CO2 levels in the atmosphere at the time those warnings were given. So you get to the very top of the line, 400 parts per million. And so the question is, I think, why were we so dense to warning? Nicole Krauss, in a little book called The Nature of Love, or pardon me, The History of Love, in describing a Polish village prior to World War II, said there were warnings of unfathomable things. And because we couldn't fathom them, we didn't believe them until it was too late and we had no choice. That's one way to describe this. This is the cartoonist way Tom Tolles of saying the same thing. You know the old story about the frog in a pot of hot water, and the frog, theoretically, I've never done the experiment. Have any of you done the experiment with boiling water and frogs? The theory goes that frogs, if the water temperatures raise slowly, won't jump out of the pot. Actually, a friend of mine who ran the experiment said it wasn't true. After a certain temperature, they all jumped out. I've never done it, didn't ask what he did with the frogs. Tom Tolles describes it in this way, but it's the same point Nicole Krauss was making, that we've been dense to warnings. And I want to stray into politics just a little bit here. Why did we not pay attention to the warnings? Well, the first thing is I want to get into something controversial, but I don't think it's far out. First thing is the corporation. There's a decision in 1886 which allegedly, and it's a more complicated decision than I'm going to describe it, but allegedly gave the legal rights of persons to corporations. Now, we'd had a long history of warnings about corporations. Go back to James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln and lots of people who looked at corporate behavior and said, hey, we got a problem here. But the role of corporations in provisioning us with food, energy, water, materials, health care, entertainment, and so forth and so on has grown over the years. And in this decision, the railroad decision, Santa Clara County decision, didn't have anything particularly important about it. It was unpaid taxes on railroad rights of way. It wasn't that big a deal. But in the way the decision was written up and the way it was interpreted, the court said that, or it was assumed that the court had said, that corporations have the legal rights of persons. Now, you and I are persons, and we can be in one place at one time. Our assets are limited, our lives are limited, and so forth. Corporations can be all over the planet. They can live for many years, in some cases centuries, and they have no conscience. We have a conscience when it's honed and used properly. But to give them the legal rights of persons, freedom of speech, and so forth and so on, that opened the door to more mischief than we can begin to describe. The second decision, Buckley and Vallejo, said that the expenditure of money is a form of freedom of speech, the First Amendment. And then Citizens United more recently, under the present court, said that corporations can give all the money that they want in the electoral process without consequence. And they don't have to tell who the money came from. We got a problem. And the problem comes down to, in part, the resolution that you worked on a day or two ago. Corporations legally can destroy the earth. They sit on fossil fuel assets, as all of you discussed, that amount to somewhere over 3,000 gigatons of carbon-based fuels, and legally they can burn the whole thing. There is no doctrine of law or justice, maybe morality, but no doctrine of law or justice that would prevent them from doing that. So this presents us with a huge conundrum. And the choices we face are, do you divest, or do we go after the legal right or go after the legal right of corporations to do what they are doing? And so ExxonMobil has every intention, as every other fossil fuel-based company, of burning the whole thing. And so they can keep the party going a few more years and keep the profits coming in, but the end result is a planet that no longer supports life as we know life today. It certainly doesn't support civilization. And so this is an issue about the rights of corporations. And our choices are to basically confiscate or to compensate. And so we struggle to find ways in which you can resolve their rights as persons and large holders of assets and power with our right to survive on the earth and the rights of future generations as well. So that's one possibility. Here is a second issue. We've made markets into something that resembles God. And that's no new revelation here to you. And if you pay attention to lots of theology and lots of work in economics, this is a well-known fact. This is the crew that, by the way, Time magazine selected in 1999 on a cover issue to save the world. And they did a heck of a job. The front person there, Alan Greenspan, was quoted in New York Times in October after the banking collapse of 2008, saying that he had discovered a flaw in his thinking. Well, imagine that. Mark that down. There was a flaw somewhere in the way the economy works, this growth economy. But you can't necessarily read this slide, but if we made a list, or you make a mental list of all of the things that are wrong with the present economy, And just start at the top of that list on the screen here. We're trying to calibrate the laws of economics as we understand those that began with Adam Smith in 1776 in the publication of a little book called or a big book called The Wealth of Nations, with the way the earth works as a physical system. And that's 3.8 billion years old. And to calibrate these laws of economics that we kind of stumble along and we believe that they're laws, with the way the earth works as a physical system, it isn't going very well. And then the last item here, among others, you can make a long, long list of things that are wrong with the economy. The belief that somehow the more stuff that we have, the happier we are. Well, we have a problem because everybody knows, certainly in this room knows, that the amount of stuff you have doesn't make you happy. Beyond some fairly minimal level, the amount of stuff just adds to your problems. And so it turns out when people study the happiness of Americans, our happiness peaked statistically about 1957. Now, for me, it was a little bit later, but that's another issue. But the amount of stuff that we had, so that flat lines like this, but the amount of stuff we had keeps rising like that. Then you've got to explain, why is it that delta between the amount of stuff we have and our happiness level is so large and continues to grow? Well, it's one of those moments where you slap your forehead and go, duh. We know that. And we know the things that make us happy are the bonds that we have with each other. It's the neighborhoods. It's what you do in your church. It's friendships that you have. It's music. It's poetry. It's baseball, whatever it may be, but it isn't stuff. And so that's another issue. And then finally, I want to address this. So many of the things that ail us have to do with inequality that is a direct result of corporations and the way we conceive how we earn our keep in the world, and inequality. So when you run the numbers come out somewhere between 400 people easily could fit in this room several times over. 400 people have more net wealth, not income, but net wealth than 150 million Americans. And we wonder why we don't have money for the things that cause us to rebuild our communities and our transportation system and our educational system, and why you struggle to fund young people that want to go into the pastorate. Well, there's no mystery here. Money has migrated to the top. The middle class in American society is sliding down. And so when you ask, why were we dense to warnings about climate change? Why the first warning given to a U.S. president was 1965? This is now 2013. We still do not have a de jure, a legal climate policy. So no particular mystery. Let me go on to say a few things about what we ought to do. George Orwell. If you haven't read George Orwell recently, pull him out off the shelf. If you've never read him, go to a bookstore, buy 1984, and read George Orwell. And Orwell said when you want to corrupt a society, basically what you do is corrupt its language first. You destroy its sense of meanings and the integrity of words. Let me give you a couple of words. How was it that patriotism got so crippled and confined to a small set of behaviors, mostly having to do with guns and violence? How did that happen? How did we become patriots? By consuming. How did that happen? Or take the word conservatism, a good word, and the next slide has Edmund Burke, the founder of modern conservatism. How did conservatism lose its interest in actually conserving things and life that supported life? How did conservatism become so concerned about conserving the rules of the game by which the rich prosper and other people fail? How is it that liberalism, that meant a broad approach to life, an openness to life, how did that become a dirty word? Do you remember, if you're old enough, the debate with with George Bush and Michael Dukakis? And George Bush Sr. accused Michael Dukakis of being a liberal. And time kind of hung in the balance for just a moment. You wanted Michael Dukakis to say, yeah, I'm a liberal, and so are you. And here's why I'm a liberal. And here's what this does for the country. And I'll show a slide in just a moment that explains why I think liberalism is a good thing. Or politics. How was it that politics became a dirty word? Huh? Politics is where you and I conduct the public business. How did that become a dirty word? It's markets on one hand are where you and I say I and me and mine. Politics is where we say we and us. And we go through the process of adjudicating lots of complicated sorts of things. But how was it that politics became a dirty word? Or government? Government is the institutions that we create to actually conduct the public business. And I know people in government service who are good people and they're good citizens and so forth. Can government become a problem? Well, yeah, but the UCC can become a problem. Oberlin College can become a problem. Every organization can become a problem. But when there are problems, you fix them, and you reform them, and you open the doors, you make them transparent. How is it public service became so demeaned and only worked in the markets and so forth? How is it that rights were separated from responsibilities? And then the last thing here, taxation, starting here in California. How did taxes become a dirty word? Oliver Wendell Holmes once told us that taxes were the price we pay for civilization. And they're a good thing as long as they're assessed fairly and they're put to good purposes that otherwise can't be achieved in markets. Taxes aren't a bad thing. But when you skew them and you allow corporations to get by without paying a fair share or any taxes at all, that's the problem. It isn't taxes, it's how they're assessed. Here's liberalism. You can't read that necessarily, but think of what we've gotten from liberalism over the course of the past, or liberals over the course of the past century or longer. Public education, child labor laws, 8-hour workdays, Social Security, women's rights, civil rights, clean air, international law, peace movements, and so forth. You can make a much longer list than I have on the screen. Liberalism is a good word. It is not a word to be ashamed of. It is our instinct to push for justice. But then so is conservatism. And if you think about the way these words work, they're flip sides of the same coin. Anybody's going to be a liberal on some issues at some time, and on other issues you're going to be conservative. And as old as I am, that changes over your life. You go from being a liberal on some issues when you're 18 or a conservative, and you'll change your opinion, and the opinions vary. We're complicated creatures. It's called thinking citizens. And so we will change opinions, and we change opinions as we're able to engage each other. Now, Edmund Burke is on the screen. Edmund Burke wrote a little book called The Reflections on the Revolution in France. Came out in 1790 as a product of the French Revolution. And in that, and in the quote here, Burke describes as a good conservative that conservatives stand midway between a distant past and a distant future. They were obliged to honor the lives and the opinions and wishes and accomplishments of people that came before them. But then they were obliged to send the things on, this what he called an entailed inheritance, to the future generations. Now, if Burke were alive here today as a conservative, he would say that one of the things that you pass on isn't just religion and customs and laws, but it's also a decent planet on which religion, customs, laws depend. He would be for taking instant climate action because that is a conservative thing to do. It's the right thing to do. So we're not just liberals or conservatives, we're a little bit of both, but some people have a good thing going by dividing us and calling you ultimately a liberal or a conservative and keeping you apart. We've got to come together. This isn't a matter of right and left, liberal versus conservative. This is a matter of us versus or with future generations. So take back our language. Now, I want to close. A UCC member, I can't remember his name now, but he said something just recently about invest and divest. Did you watch the tail end of President Obama's speech? Invest in those things that support life. Divest in all those things that don't support life or place it in jeopardy altogether. This is that choice that we face. And this is the choice that all of us face. So I applaud your efforts on this. And this is a matter of utmost importance. And then, secondly, why not begin to develop UCC the first body, religious body on earth to say that we're going to be net zero by 2030. Put a date on the clock and say we will as a congregation. Some will make it, some won't, some will overexceed, but of all the churches, UCC churches, let's be the first net carbon zero or carbon positive denomination or church segment in the world. Let's lead. That's the UCC tradition. And if you ask, is that possible to do? The answer is certainly yes. In Little Oberlin, Ohio, a little city of 10,000, 35 miles from downtown Cleveland, our electric supply for the municipality will be over 90% carbon-free this year. We deployed a 3-megawatt solar array last fall. We're working with energy efficiency throughout the whole community. We're forming a company that deals with solarization and weatherization and energy efficiency in low-income neighborhoods and all the way through the community. We can do these things. This isn't a matter of technology. It's not even a matter of economics. It's a matter now of leadership. And the UCC Church is a leadership institution, and all of you are as well. This is the challenge. And I put this slide here just to point out something. If you took all the fossil fuels, we burn, by the way, about 4 cubic miles of fossil fuels every year. But if you put all the fossil fuels that were on the planet when we first emerged as a species, the sunshine that hits the planet in 13 days is a larger amount. We could provide the entire energy for the planet with only a few minutes of sunshine that hit every part of the earth. This isn't a technological impossibility any longer. If you say, can you power buildings, churches, and schools, and so forth entirely by sunshine, the answer is yes, we can. If you say, is it affordable? Yes, it is. Is it the right thing to do? Absolutely. So I want to end with a couple of thoughts. This is Martin Luther King. This is a speech that he gave, the famous Fierce Urgency of Now talk just before he was assassinated. He said in the speech, there's such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare and naked and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tiding affairs of man does not remain at the flood, it ebbs. We may cry out desperately for a time to pause in her passage, but time is deaf to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late. We can't be too late. Our mandate, yours and mine, and this civilization and all caring people, is to choose life and to understand what that means. Thank all of you for doing what you do to choose life. Thank you, UCC.